You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and Jenny Kleeman, journalist and broadcaster. They'll both be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. A winter of disconnect. That's the front of the Metro after news that the UK could be facing power cuts over the next few months because of a shortage of gas from abroad. According to The Times, the cuts are part of a long-standing emergency plan for any future energy crisis. The Eye says the worst-case scenario so far is for rolling power cuts of 3 hours duration. That story is also lead item for The Telegraph. The Express too makes it the top story. The Star says one measure that could be taken is to pay people to use appliances at off-peak times, hence the suggestion to wash your underwear in the middle of the night. But, says the Mail, the money on offer is only likely to be about £10 a day. The Guardian, meanwhile, reports that charities are worried that power cuts could mean loss of life for some vulnerable people. The Financial Times leads with comments from the Bank of England that if it hadn't intervened in the market turmoil after the new government's mini-budget, then Britain would have been on the brink of a financial crisis. And finally, The Sun leads with a story about a likely competitor on ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and Jenny Kleeman, journalist and broadcaster. Welcome to you both. Let us start with the Metro, and I think they get the prize for the headline of the day, a winter of disconnect. Jenny.
I don't really like this headline, but yes, this is kind of making us all remember about the 1970s, just when you thought everything that could go wrong has already gone wrong. The National Grid is now warning that in a worst case scenario, there could be rolling power cuts, 3 hours each. We would have warning of them. It would be different parts of the country at different times. I think every year they model different scenarios going into the winter. They modelled 3 scenarios. This was definitely the worst case, and the National Grid said very unlikely to happen. But of course, it spooked everybody. We all feel like we've gone back to the 1970s with rail strikes and inflation, and now the threat of rolling power cuts, hence the winter of discontent or disconnect. But we've just got to hope it's not a cold winter. The issue is we simply do not have enough storage of gas. 40% of our electricity is generated by gas-fired power stations. And we need to have more diversity in our supply, very simply. This is the issue. And because we don't have enough, we are relying on gas supplies, although we don't rely on Russia for our gas supplies. We are dependent on what happens in Europe.
Despite the headline, the article is actually saying that it's unlikely that there will be a gas shortage, isn't it, Jake?
That's right. And when I read these stories, and the Metro is by far from the only paper to have this on its front page, it did strike me that there's a lot of hysteria and concern about this, and concern rightly so, but it perhaps seems to be a little bit exaggerated because it does need to be a perfect storm before these blackouts happen. For a start, we need to have a cold snap, as Jenny's pointed out. Then we need to have a low amount of wind. Those two things got to happen at the same time. And then a reduction in the amount of energy we can import from France, Belgium and Holland. And only then would we begin to resort to blackouts. But that would also be accompanied by firing up 3 coal burning stations, which were due to be mothballed, getting them back into service to cover some of the shortfall. And then we'd be looking at power cuts, which would be carefully rolled out and calibrated among the population with a protection, so we're told, for people who are vulnerable. So I think that to think that we're going to have uncontrolled power cuts occurring at any time of the day without warning, like some other poor countries in poor parts of the world, I think is incorrect. It is a serious situation, but let's not get panicking too early.
But The Guardian, though, is looking at the worst case scenario, and we've got people predicting what could possibly happening. They're suggesting loss of life if those who need life-saving machines are having to turn them off for 3 hours a day. So although what you seem to be saying is that it's a bit of scaremongering, perhaps, this is the likely outcome if we do get to that end stage. Jenny?
Well, I mean, I do think this is a bit alarmist as well, because, of course, hospitals are not going to be affected. The Guardian's coverage is about people who require life-saving medical equipment at home. So we're talking about things like dialysis and ventilators. They simply cannot be without electricity. And the Guardian does make the point that the choice that they are going to be faced with, people who rely on that equipment, is whether or not to go into hospital and be admitted to hospital, which is not a choice you would want to make, certainly if you're a parent of a child that needs a ventilator or needs any of this life-saving equipment. You wouldn't want them to be in hospital when they could be at home. But it doesn't necessarily mean that lives are going to be at risk. And what this story seems to be is the worst case scenario of a worst case scenario. And I would agree, we need to take this with a pinch of salt. The good thing is that we are wargaming this. We are looking at what might happen and being prepared for it. That's what the National Grid is for, is to look at all scenarios. It's good that we're having this conversation now, but I do think if you were walking into a newsagent tomorrow morning and looking at this spread of front pages, you might be quite frightened.
Jake, do you agree that we need to take this particular headline with a pinch of salt?
A pinch of salt. I wouldn't perhaps have quite put it like that, but I do agree with Jenny that the government and the National Grid has put into place plans to protect vulnerable households as well as hospitals, and so those people should not be unduly concerned. However, this all depends upon the system working properly, and everybody who needs dialysis machines at home, for example, is able to be exempted from any of the power cuts that are being rolled out in their area with the consent of people, of local people. But it does require the system to work. I'm not sure that everybody has complete confidence in the system to protect them at all times. So I can understand why people who do rely upon machines to live, to sustain their life, may be concerned. But at the same time, we do need to see it. Overall, this is, like as Jenny very well put it, it's a worst case scenario of a worst case scenario.
Yes, but we could have seen this coming down the tracks. And speaking to our political correspondent tonight, Sam Coates, is saying that the government had been preparing for this very scenario, but just hadn't made us aware of it. So people are not prepared, and that's something that the government could have done, couldn't they, Jenny? Prepared people for this scenario?
No. I think so. I think there's a lot that the government could have done, and other countries have had public information campaigns, for example, urging people to use energy at off-peak times, not just to save on gas and electricity bills, but just to even out demand. And our government seems to have really shied away from doing that and from preparing people's mindset. Maybe they don't want to bum people out any more than we've already been. I keep waiting for good news and for things to start to get better, but they really seem to be just getting worse and worse. But, the way that we're going to make sure that things really don't get worse is to be prepared for every eventuality, and the government could do more to kind of pave the way for that.
Jake, why do you think the government hasn't prepared the public? Why aren't we being told to unplug our plugs, switch off lights, do our washing at, out of peak hours? But why aren't we being told this? Why isn't there a government information film that's being put out there?
I think there are a variety of reasons for that, one of which is that the government's been quite busy with trying to survive. There was that period when Boris was sort of in place but knew he was going, that seemed to be characterised by stasis at the heart of government when all of this was brewing. And then we had the leadership election, of course, and then we had Liz Truss and dealing with her mini budget and all that. So the government's been quite busy managing itself, let alone managing the country. But also I think that the government has perhaps not wanted to alarm people and not wanted to give advice about rationing and things, which can really affect people's sense of security and confidence before it was absolutely necessary. And I think that's fair enough, really. Like I say, it may be that we get through this winter without any of these measures needing to be introduced, and everything could be fine. But what the government really is guilty of over many, many years is not developing a robust framework within our energy security, making us too reliant upon importing energy, not enough storage, and pursuing net zero targets, which need to be pursued, but at an unrealistic pace, leaving our energy supply in a very fragile state. So all of those things on a longer term basis need to be solved. But certainly, I think the government has been very preoccupied with itself lately.
Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. Still with me, Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and Jenny Kleeman, journalist and broadcaster. Welcome back to both of you. Let us take a look at the Financial Times, and pictured on the front there, two of the European leaders assemble for this security conference, should we say, in Prague. And we noticed, we haven't actually got the shots of it, but I noticed that the family photo, Liz Truss was right at the back on the left. Read into that as you will. Oh, do we have that? Do we have the family photo shot? But talk us into this story, Jenny.
Well, this is this new European Club of Nations. It was Macron's idea. 44 countries, all of the EU, Switzerland, Norway, us, Turkey, some countries that never wanted to join the EU, some that have left, some that want to join. The idea is they all come together to talk about security, stability, prosperity, migration, and energy security. And this is kind of Putin's worst nightmare, really. It is amazing how much the invasion of Ukraine has served to galvanize all the different parts of the world that Vladimir Putin wanted to cause havoc in terms of NATO and in terms of Europe. This is beyond the EU. This is a wider Europe coming together to present a united front. I think obviously energy security is going to be a really big part of all of it, as well as migration and as well as the physical security of the rest of Europe. Liz Truss there today, she's clearly decided that Macron is a friend rather than a foe. But what is really interesting in terms of our place, the UK, in this European club, is the extent to which Liz Truss is always going on about her key to everything is growth, growth, growth. And in order to really maximise growth, we have to have a better relationship with Europe in many different ways. But that is the kind of antagonism at the moment at the heart of the Conservative Party when it comes to the single market, when it comes to migration. There is huge parts of Liz Truss's party that want her to pull away from Europe. So there was a lot of rhetoric when she was appealing to Conservative voters that was quite anti-European. Now that she's a leader and now that she's out there, that rhetoric is gone. And she's obviously much more comfortable talking about energy security and Vladimir Putin than she is on home soil talking about the economy.
Interesting, Jake, though, as Jenny's saying, during the campaigning, asked whether Macron was friend or foe. She said she was undecided. Seems to have rapidly made up her mind now, though.
That's right. I mean, the headlines that accompanied that comment back then were pretty poor. And now she seems to have affirmed that he is a friend after all. And it does seem that on the broader sense, the pressure from Ukraine and from Vladimir Putin's war there has caused the Europeans on the whole to realise they need to stick together more, even with countries with whom they might disagree. And I think on all sides, they seem to be growing up a bit and working together. There's a new Anglo-French summit that's been announced for next year. Macron and Liz Truss have agreed to work together more to counter the migrant disaster in the Channel. And also London has been named as one of the locations for a meeting of this new group, the European Political Community, in 2024, which was an announcement which was greeted very warmly. So it seems that cordiality has broken out a little bit, at least, or at least the first hint of it in Europe and further afield. And this is very, very welcome for a country who's been a little bit exasperated by seeing our political leaders behaving like children, engaging in tit-for-tat, spiteful warfare, rather than growing up and getting on with the jobs of being good friends and neighbours.
Jenny, very quickly, just tell us what Jacob Rees-Mogg is planning. This Telegraph.
He wants there to be a bank holiday for the King's coronation, which is said to be 2nd of June, but it's not been confirmed. Again, we have a government that's all about growth. How could they call for a new bank holiday? But you can see Jacob Rees-Mogg is very much a traditionalist. Of course, he's going to want everybody to have the day off to see the king being crowned. And I've just come back from the US. They love all of the pageantry that we have here. Potentially, this is very good for our economy, having a big, something to draw in the tourists, a king being crowned.
Jenny and Jake, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next hour. Thank you.